Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
bringing you this week's Ascended World weekly collective energy share. So it was funny because we had to we had to sort of talk for a minute before we got on. Like, wait, what was it we were going to talk about today? Things are so big that it's like, oh, that was 3 days
Right.
ago. What was I talking about last? So I'll start with the background of what we chatted about on Friday. That was the like just what do we call it? Like our pre-call call.
Right.
And so we were talking about something that had come up for you, and then you were talking about that whole like irritation at why we would still believe, that we needed to have any kind of suffering because I was talking about, and I was talking about a client and some big stuff that was coming through and that it might be really uncomfortable, because it was a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. And then you said, well, yeah, I just don't understand if we still have, when we got into that, and I'm like, you know, and the more we were talking about it, I thought, is it truly like we're talking about beliefs around do we believe we have to suffer, say like we call it a healing crisis, right? Do we
Right.
believe we
Right.
have, do we believe we have to suffer to let a whole bunch of something go? Do we believe we have to get sick to change something? And what came to me, and then the more we talked about it, the more I was like, oh yeah, it was so big for us, both of us, was to realize that it's not necessarily a belief. So a lot of times we get into this and we're like, oh, it's just a belief that we have to suffer. But the thing is, if we look at it really with a magnifying glass, which we try not to very much because there's so much detail, right?
Right.
It was the how really what happens, what we call a healing crisis, or that we feel like is suffering when we're really letting go of some big stuff or changing some big stuff, is not necessarily a belief that we have to suffer, but it's some real hidden place for the ego to say, oh, wait a second, I'm really uncomfortable letting go of all this stuff. So I'm going to try to hold on to it in some kind of way that's going to make us trip up, which is really what we call our healing crisis, right? Because the ego is going,
Right.
no, 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 right? And then once we looked at that, it was like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? So it's not really a belief of needing to suffer. It is just the ego making it more painful for us because it doesn't want to let go of something because it believes is what I can't remember how we even saw it, was like pulling away its identity, pulling away things that it built itself on as a foundation and things
Right.
like that.
Well,
And then,
and you add into it the ego's judgment of the circumstances and saying, I can't have other people think this about me. So I need to make myself so uncomfortable that I won't do that.
right, right. Or it's gonna like, or I'm gonna try to hold on so tightly as it's falling away that it will
Right.
cause so much friction within me that it's gonna cause some kind of injury, illness, crisis of some kind, because there's gonna be that much, and it's really from the friction within us of
Right.
that ego trying to hold on to something for whatever reason, saying, oh, well, who will I be without this? Who can,
Right.
like, or, every time I talk about this, it makes me sick, or anytime I try this, or, oh, I was doing this and I let all this stuff and now I have to be sick for a week, right? People say that, right? And so that can be a belief, but that can also
Mm-hmm.
be interspersed with, like, looking at the history of what's happened before. And then the ego says, oh, well, yeah, you really want to let go of that? Well, I'm going to make it hard for us because I don't want to do that.
Right. Right. Or I
And
have to
sometimes,
suffer, or I have to suffer in order to gain this or to
yeah.
create this.
So you said that was in your face all weekend?
Yes, yes. It's like, you know, even if you run into something, say with work or whatever, I've noticed that if things don't play out as you expect them to, or haven't been created in the way you think they'll be created, if you create that drama around, your personal sacrifice and, oh, I tried and look, it's made me sick, and it's like it's attempting to either deflect the reality of the circumstances, or it's the ego saying, it's okay because I suffered because of it. And it's
Right.
still that ego saying, no, I'm going to hold on to this and I'm going to justify it by saying, but I made myself sick doing it. So
Mhm.
it's not as bad, or it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then we get into that whole cycle, that suffering cycle of somehow then we build it onto our identity.
Yeah.
So, so that is a really, and when we finally saw that, it was like, wow, that's a really little fine line that really drives us in so many ways that we don't even realize.
Right.
And part of it is because the ego saying, if we're like, especially right now, because we're letting go of so many things, right? So like in the conversation we were having about this client, and they said, you know what, I am ready. I want to let it go. And actually, I did an entire session with them on like there were these little stoppers that the client had put into place in different parts of
Right.
their, physicality so that they couldn't open the pipes all the way to let go of stuff because there was that egoic intervention within them. And I said, well, okay, so we believe it has to be overwhelming. So like if I say, okay, so the big dam is going to break, right? Then we get afraid. Um, we think we're going to get overwhelmed. We think we're not going to be able to handle it. We think it's going to be bigger than us, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, there's nothing bigger than us. It's all a part of us. But it's that whole like, okay, when I was working with this client, I said, well, so basically what we did was we unclogged all the pipes. And I was like, and I sort of got the feeling of like when you have one of those viruses and you throw up, and then you have that like period in between of throwing up where you're like, oh, I feel good again. And then it's like, oh, it starts to build up again. And I said,
Right.
yeah. I said, I want to say it might feel like that for a little while. I'm like, but I don't want to say like with the inflection that it's going to be painful or hurting because that's going to be up to you. And that's what I say to people all the time. That's really up to each one of us. We
Right.
don't have to have a healing crisis. We don't have to. There was a woman I used to know who, like, she would, whenever she had a big opening energetically, she would get a migraine. And I said, well, you can change that. Excuse my God. Oh, God, this is big.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I would say, well, you can change that. And she'd be like, oh, no, that's okay. Because to her, that was validation that there was some big energetic opening. And I'm like, but you can do that in like getting, you know, a tingling in your pinky. You don't have to do it through
Right.
having a painful migraine or something,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So, but the thing is, it's like, okay, the response we trigger is what the ego is trying to like avoid letting go of.
Right.
And
Right.
what we know at some level will distract us from doing that, even if it's in that moment, right? And so then it becomes a sort of a friction between the higher consciousness and the ego, which,
Right.
what we were talking about too on Friday was, so what's the solution to that? Well, the solution is the ego needs to understand this isn't like coming into our remembrance, isn't negating the value of the ego. It's giving it it's like saying, yes, I'm laying you off, right? I think that's what came to us on Friday. It's like, yes, I'm
Yeah.
laying you off, but I've got this other position for you that's even more like awesome. It's better pay. You're gonna have so much more fun, because as we sort of see it, that the ego was created for the exploration of separation and identity and duality.
Right.
And if we utilize it in coming back to remembrance while still talking about our individual wholeness, which I think we talked about the week before, didn't we? We talked about that last week.
Yeah. I believe we talked about it last week.
Can't remember. But it's like, okay, so let's say, okay, the individual wholeness is concentric with the divine wholeness of all of it. And so there is separation in the wholeness, but it's part of the wholeness. And if we can retrain the ego to see that, then it still can do a job that's much more valuable for us
Right.
moving
It can
forward
accept
than,
that promotion.
right, instead of trying to hold us back,
Right.
finding distractions and all these other things and whatever. All these other things to do, like we've been talking about distractions after distractions after distractions over the past
Right.
several weeks, right?
Right.
And so, well, part of the distractions is the ego going, yeah, no, that's uncomfortable to let go of. So let's like, here's a shiny, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, honestly, I don't know about you. I've had moments, a lot of them in the past several weeks, where I'm like humming along fine. And then all of a sudden it's like I fall off this deep cliff of, well, who am I? Like, what does anything I do matter?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
And then it's like, why is any of this important? It's not, and it was just like, it's like, and then it's like, there'll be a little bump and then I'll just readjust and be back. So I know that's the underworkings, of the ego trying to get its bearings with all the changing and shifting and expansion going on. Because
Right.
there is that balance, right?
Right. 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 And as we blur the lines between separation and wholeness, it's going to become more uncomfortable and more um, threatened. And this promotion allows that to smooth out and give it a new purpose.
Oh my goodness, I cannot stop yawning today, so this must be really, really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So let me think, 'cause you know what? I hummed along all weekend, and I'm trying to remember what came up on to even look at within that. Yesterday, was it yesterday? I had it irritated. Was it yesterday morning? I think I texted you. I was like, well, everybody, oh, I think it was Saturday. Everybody's
It's
like,
Saturday. Yeah, Saturday.
everybody's irritated around me,
Right.
and now I'm starting to get irritated because of it. I was just like,
Yeah. 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 Friday was great. Saturday, yes, there was irritation. And yesterday seemed to smooth out a little bit. But what
yeah,
I found was that I felt challenged in the new power I had created for myself.
yeah,
And that I felt that no matter how much effort is exerted to pull me back to where I was, it just wasn't going to happen. And it felt so much more authentic, which I think all of this does contribute to that new level of authenticity,
oh, absolutely,
allowing,
absolutely, yeah,
allowing that ego to evolve and to be promoted into that. Now, whether you want to call it egoic wholeness or, you know, because at some level the ego does still exist, um, until it doesn't totally, which we're not there yet.
well, and it's sort of like saying, okay, so now instead of like exploring to increase separation and identity, right? It's seeing the identity as part, as whole in itself, but then also the wholeness around it. It's like being observant to the bigger picture, right? To the ego,
Right.
to see how everything aligns, I think, from the smallest to the largest point, or something like that. There's not quite the words. That's the challenge these days, is we get there and it's like there's no words beyond this, right?
Right. Right. Well, and I know Friday after we talked, I felt a huge sense of freedom and a whole new level of freedom and a whole new level of relief that, oh, okay, almost like the rules are changed and they're easier now.
Yes.
And it's like, talk about the video game. We've got so many new powers at this level.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I think that's what, what it was? I think maybe Saturday was that adjustment of not only me, but everybody around me to this
Right,
vibration, right? And that's
right,
probably why there was so much irritation
right,
going on.
right. No, I completely agree. I completely agree. And Saturday was a lot of uh, I see it as buffering up against the old
Hmm. Yes.
and 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 then allowing it to finally shift to that higher vibration.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Bumping is a good word for
Yeah, and
bumping
that,
up against. Oh, see, I can't stop yawning today. Good grief, that's weird. I was fine until we got on. Yes, yeah, that's really what it was. Because I know on Saturday there were these intermittent moments of futility again, right? Why even
right.
say anything? Why even use my voice at all? Nobody hears me,
Yep.
da da da. Like, and then it's like, well, what does it matter? Doesn't matter.
Right.
And then there was like, and then there was that voice just started getting louder and louder, and then it was like, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden it was, and I think that did carry over into early yesterday morning, and it was about midday yesterday that I started seeing a pretty significant shift in everything. Um, and I did have a couple of moments of outright standing in my truth
Oh, yeah.
on stuff that came up that was just like, yep, this is unequivocal,
Right.
and this
I
is how
had
I
that.
feel.
Yep. I had that last night, and I very much, I'd say I drew a line in the sand, but, I got rid of the sand and the need to even draw a line, and that it just
Yeah,
was, that
yeah,
there was no challenge to it. It just was,
hmm
which I think that's what feels best about this shift is getting to that place where it's natural.
yeah. And part of it is what's interesting is something I've noticed, and I know that, and it's really interesting because obviously it's passing and flowing and shifting really quickly because I cannot think of specific circumstances except for one over like the past week or two. Oh no, I can now. Okay, I just had a like moment. I was like, oh, um, but I've had multiple situations, and as you know, over the past several weeks, of almost having to call people out on stuff in their interactions with me that they're trying, sort of like that's a subversive way of almost manipulation, but also just not living up to their authenticity in my reality, kind of thing.
Right,
Or it's
right,
not quite
right.
where I've had to call it out. And it was not even in an egoic way. It was like guidance was call them out. That it wasn't
Hmm.
even call them out. It was guidance was, stand in this truth and
Right,
be blatant about it. Like blatant.
right,
Which then is basically sort of was calling them out on some things that was not optimal for me.
right.
And actually not just for me, but for other people involved. So so I keep on saying it's like this call everything out kind of energy because there's no like with this, there's no more room for hiding it in the cracks and crevices, right?
Right.
And you find it so much easier to just, like you're saying, not only draw the line in the sand, but throw away the sand and just say, yeah, no, this is how I am, or not. And like you can either accept that or not, period. But
Right.
this is the situation. This is how it is. This is how it affects me, or this is like how I feel, or what it's saying to me. And you can take it or leave it. And there's no energy about it. There's no judgment. There's no saying, you're a crappy person if you don't. There's nothing. It's just
Right.
like, this is the situation.
Right.
Like,
It's the new reality.
let's not lie to ourselves. This is what it is.
Right.
And man, that makes some people very uncomfortable.
Right. Right. Well, it's like all the things that they've hidden behind are gone.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the part I love about it the most
Yes.
is that it's that level of authenticity that there's no more. I don't know. I saw something, and I know I've always understood and I've seen multiple times where, your perception of me has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you. And
Right.
if you really focus on that and really look at, so as you clear away the misperceptions about yourself and take away all the things that the distractions and everything you've hidden behind, whether you want to call them woundings or resistance, or whatever words you want to use, the 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 freer and the clearer and the cleaner all your interactions become, because that mirror back to you becomes more honest and more clear. And it's, to me, it's just the ultimate freedom. And it's like, oh, I can lay all this down, I can put
Right.
all this, I can just let it go.
Well, and we don't have to carry around what it's sort of like what I think of is like you see how like in old movies they would have like or actually I think they still do that with facades, right? Facade, literally the facades, like the pretend storefronts, right? So it's like,
Right,
okay, so instead of you and me walking around and carrying this whatever 3,000 pound weight of this facade of pretending something that doesn't serve either one of us, let's finally just put this down and call it what it is and then move on.
right, right,
Get it done because the more we try to pussyfoot around, the more we try to look around this wall or work around that wall or, claim it's for this purpose or that purpose and it's really not. It just doesn't serve either one of us,
right, right, right.
and that can be very jarring. It's very jarring to some because what it is to the ego, it's, oh no, you just called me out.
Right,
Right?
right. And then it's like, oh, but look how much effort you put into creating that.
Yeah.
It's very creative.
Yeah. And then once it's there, once you've gotten past it, it's just like, oh, this is so much easier.
Right.
So
Yeah, I can
this is
already
yet
feel that overwhelming me.
except here I'm still yawning. Oh, but
Yeah.
it's such a shift in whatever that we're shifting today. It's like I said, I was fine. I wasn't yawning at all.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because you could think it's overwhelming, but it's really not because it's actually easier because we're putting less energy into stuff.
Right. Right.
You just are who
I
you
guess,
are.
yeah, I guess what's overwhelming is how much is being let go.
Yes. Well, when we
It's
think about it, right.
it's almost like you didn't even realize all that was there.
Yeah. And I think that's what was the friction that I was feeling Saturday into Sunday, Saturday into Sunday, where it was
Oh,
just
yeah.
like, and that was like, because there's an adjustment that happens when you commit to that within yourself, right? Then
Right.
everything around us, like everything in our reality has to adjust to that vibration, which then
Right.
makes it uncomfortable because others who are interacting with you to feed off of that same whatever, you were playing, whatever, reality you chose or whatever that wasn't authentic, like they're like, wait a second, and it can be jarring to everybody around you going, wait a second. Like, wait,
Right.
who are you now? Like, how can we do this anymore? Like, I want to do this. Why are we stopping? Because it
Right.
served me in some way.
Right. Right. Right.
And then,
Yeah.
boy, I'm going to be pissed at you because you did that. Why? How dare you? How dare you change that? How dare you change the game? How dare you leave the playground?
Right.
And so that can be really cranky for your reality for a while. And it was funny because I did have sort of an awareness of that. Yeah, what was my comment yesterday when he was like, God, everybody around me is cranky. I'm getting irritable because of that. But that
Yeah.
was, and looking back at it, it was really once it was an adjustment, everything shifted, and then the rest of the day was glorious. And I
Right.
had people around me, the same people around me all day, and it was a completely different interaction, which was
Right.
interesting.
Right. Yeah. That's when I found that some of the drama was created too. Like, oh well, I sacrificed so much, and so now I'm sick. And it's like, well, that's to justify where they've been, and that's like, we don't even need that. We don't need that anymore.
Yeah. And that goes back to that whole suffering thing. Oh, I have
Right.
to suffer to do this, or it makes me more important when I have suffered, or, like
Right.
that's the belief we put on top of it to justify it.
Right. Right.
Instead of, okay, let's call it what it is and say, oh, and that's why that energy was that way all weekend. Let's call it what it is. The ego doesn't
Yeah.
want to let go of this.
Right.
it's fighting tooth and nail to not let go of it, which is causing huge friction because the higher self is saying, yeah, time for us to move on. The ego is saying no because it's part of my identity. Give me that blanket. I want to wrap it back around me. And the
Right.
higher self is like, there is no blanket. And the ego is going, yes, there is. Stop it. So I'm going to make, like there's all this, like, there's all
And I'm
this
gonna get
fighting
sick
going.
because I don't have the blanket, and
It's a,
I'm gonna
yeah,
be,
yeah.
I'm gonna have
Oh
to
yeah,
suffer.
I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna be all diseased and sick by doing that. I have to take that away.
Right.
It's like, and this is and we laugh, but these are the inner conversations that go on at some level of consciousness, even if we don't
Right.
recognize them. And it's sort of like, it is funny
Oh,
when we like call it out. When we call it out into the plain sight, it's like, oh, that's sort of funny, isn't it?
right.
And it's like, okay, look at what we're wrapping ourselves with, right?
Right.
In our identity, in the things that we have day to day, and the things that we say, oh, this is just who I am. Be aware when we say something along the lines of, this is just who I am.
Right.
And I can't change that because
Right.
can't is an ego word. And when you say, I can't change that, it means no, I choose not to change that because I believe it serves me in some way.
Right. I
And
allow
so,
that to limit me.
yes. And it finds me in some way. And then the more
Right.
you push to get rid of it, the more there causes more friction and suffering that comes into play. So this is where we call out the ego and say, okay, I see your game. It's not even a belief now, or it's not it's like I build my beliefs on top of this. So let's clear
Right.
this out because it really holds me back. What I saw with this client was literally like these stones that were blocking her pipes of energy that she
Right.
put in because she kept on saying she wanted to let it go, but then the ego at some level was like, oh no, because we've had this so embedded for so long. You're gonna open up those pipes, we're gonna have to let it go. It's gonna be so painful because then we're not gonna know who we are, we're not gonna know what to do, blah blah blah, like in that self.
And it gets into that. Now, look, we've discussed this before, and you've agreed with me that it's best to keep this in place.
That's right. That's right. So why are we don't want to change that? Yeah. So I mean these are the inner discussions that we have at some level. So and the thing is, whenever we have a lot of friction going on, a lot of things that, so here's the thing that I've always said, and this is really important, I think, or I feel, is the idea that, oh my God, that was so big, it just flew out of my head. What was it? Oh my God. Oh well, it's gone. It was huge, and then it just passed right through, so I couldn't even hold on to it.
Well, I'm
What were we
sure we'll pick
talking
it up
about?
in the meditation.
What were we talking about now? What did I say right before that? Before I stopped? I don't remember.
I'm not sure I could even tell you.
There's so much going on right now. Oh, we agreed on, so you said, yeah, we agreed on that. We agreed to hold on to that.
Right. We've been here before. We've talked about that, and it's in your best interest to keep this all in place.
Right. Oh, that was it. The more we, yeah, the more we create. So, like when we have situations, oh, there it is. I remember now. So this is how I've always seen suffering, but now it has context in this kind of discussion because I'm like, okay, because when I was always looking at suffering before, I was like, suffering is truly just the perspective of the individual, right?
Right.
So
Right.
like like okay, um, somebody might say, okay, this person came down with a cold, right, or something, right, or the flu, or let's just make it something simple like that. And oh, isn't that terrible? That they were sick, right? It's so terrible, and oh, and blah 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 blah. When the person themselves, oh, interesting, because you were talking about the sickness thing, has like driven themselves to the ground and their higher self keeps on saying walk away, walk away, walk away, give yourself some space, give yourself some nourishment, stop like sacrificing yourself. So
Right.
finally it says, well, guess what? Now I'm not going to give you any choice but to make you sick. So you're flat on your back and you can't do
Right.
anything but take care
But
of
take
yourself.
care of yourself.
Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And so,
I had a client that I talked to about that, and I said, funny how, you know, you run yourself ragged all summer long, and then you either have a fall or you get chronic, like bronchitis, or you get pneumonia, or you get this, or you get this at this time of the year to where you have no choice but to do all the things you should have been doing all along.
yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And when we start to see things that way, right? So many of us start to see things that way. And on the rare occasion that I get run down about something, because I'm very good at, very dedicated to that self-nourishment stuff, it's like, okay, so obviously, what do I need to step back from? And usually it's because, and I can always look at it as, oh, yeah, look at this, because my guidance was, oh, don't do this. Take this time or space to do this. And I
Right.
pushed myself through and said, no, 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 I've got to do this, this, and this. And then I was like, okay, well, you're not going to listen, and you know how committed you are to that. So guess what? We're going to not even let it go very long. Here, I'm going to lay you up for a little bit. Or for some reason, going to cause you to need to back away and take a breath, whether you twist your ankle or you get sick or you have like a power outage or you have like a computer breakdown, like, these kind of things
Right.
can be
Car trouble.
thing,
Anything.
yeah, things that force you to step back and step away, right?
Right.
These are
Right.
different ways of looking at that. And so when you look at it that way, you're like, oh, that's not suffering. That's just like, okay. And then we just sort of laugh and say, okay, I did that to myself, right?
Right.
But
Right.
also, like we were talking about, like we've talked about that whole perception of suffering. And, like one of the examples I know we've talked about over the summer was like the whole thing with my moving and getting a new house and how some people look at it as, oh my God, the DOT buyer is buying your house and how terrible and whatever. And it's going to be a terrible, you know, experience and whatever. And for us, it was like, it was great.
Right.
We got a great settlement on it. We found a beautiful, amazing house afterward. And I chose to experience it in a way that was expansive, right? So, but others might look at us and say, "Oh my God, isn't that awful? They were in this house for 22 years and then they had to." I mean, I had that discussion just last night. I ran into somebody who I hadn't seen in a number of years, who we have people in common. So they'd heard about what's been going on with me, but we just hadn't seen each other. And
Right.
in the conversation, they're like, "Oh, I heard what happened." And that's exactly, the eyes get bigger and they're like, "Oh, I heard what happened to your house. That you had your house taken away from you."
Yeah. And
And
yeah. And it
and
couldn't have
and
been farther from the truth.
right. And I just said, "Yeah, actually it was great." And they just sort of stopped.
Right.
But that's our choice. So it's our choice to perceive something as suffering, right? Or we
Exactly.
can
Yeah.
choose to see it as the lesson or the message. And I don't even like using the word lesson anymore. We choose to see it as the message it's supposed to be, to show us something we're not looking at otherwise. And when we
Right.
do that, it will abate
Exactly.
and
Yep.
resolve itself. And usually sometimes it'll even push us in a direction that we hadn't seen before that was even better than we started. So,
Right.
what I keep on saying, I hear myself saying a lot these days to many people, is keep your heart open and allow all possibility in your
Right.
creations.
Right.
Because as we all are more and more online, it's just a different, like, these, to really fulfill, I guess, the note in our symphony is to allow ourselves to be any note in any given moment, depending on where we fit. And that is part of what this is leading up to, because it's to let the ego needs to let go of the moment to moment things that we have so deeply embedded as part of our identity. This ties it back around to what we were talking about. And so the more we retrain the ego and we repurpose it and give it that better job and the promotion and the much better benefits and everything else, then we can align ourselves to embrace that fluidity in any given moment.
Right. Right. Yep.
It's like, okay, so at this moment, I might need to fulfill my note by, I don't know, basket weaving. I'm just saying like something random, like who knows? And if it's for me to do wholeheartedly for whatever reason, then it's great. We
Right.
sit here and we measure, like the ego wants to measure our greatness and our impact and like, oh, I want to make my mark, right? That's how many times they're like, oh, how do you make your mark on leave your mark? And it's like
Right.
just by being here,
Right.
just by being. And you don't even know. I saw some meme on Facebook or some social media uh, a couple of times over the past several weeks, and it's so true on, you know, saying, oh, well, it's like you think that we have to have this huge, grandiose, specific purpose that, blows your socks off, which, by the way, they are when you see the bigger picture, no matter what it is, right? But the
Exactly.
way we try to define it in our minds is, oh, I've got to do this, or I've got to make my mark, and I've got to, be famous, and I've got to, like lead the way on this. And it's like, but that's then putting you into a place of identity, right? An ego by saying, I have to do this. But what if one day you wake up and it's like, okay, so today we're going to go ice skating. I don't know. We're going to go make baskets for a living today, right? Or we're going
Yeah.
to go do this. And then the mind tries to say, oh, but that doesn't align with this. Like I'm supposed to be doing this. And it's like, but that was yesterday or an
Right.
hour ago.
Right. Yep.
And many times we get to this place of, okay, we start to accept the bigger part of us and the ability to be magical in all ways. And then all of a sudden, but then we put expectations to what that's supposed to look like. So then we start going this one path, and then the ego does all it can do to not pull us away, to not allow us to go beyond that, because now the ego says, "Oh, look at how great I am because I chose this." Right? And look
Okay.
at how this is so important and on the bigger scale of things or whatever, but basket weaving, like how's that important in the bigger, like just like I said, I'm just using something that came into my mind.
You're really picking on basket weaving today.
I, I don't know why, yeah. But it's like you don't know like that some of the when we are in that state of being, in that divine perfection in every moment, and that realization of I can be whole within myself and whole within the divine, and I can align myself with these moment to moment, like only now. I can align myself with only now, right?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
then the ego says, okay, so if I only have now, then this is what I can define as now. Like this is what I can define from the bigger picture. And then we let go of the past, let go of the history, and then there's no suffering anymore. There's no
Right.
more friction, there's no more sickness, there's no more, suffering or injury or anything else, because we don't literally trip ourselves up anymore trying to move forward when the ego is trying to hold us back. And and we figure out how to come around and move into this like different space of being. Because no matter what you're doing, you know, everything we do is affecting the bigger picture. Everything.
Right. Right.
So, um, even if it's just to make somebody laugh, like the
Right.
ripples of our being, the ripples of our being are infinite, infinitely large.
Right.
Ooh, that felt really good to even say. I can just sort of feel that. And maybe it's a matter of us just remembering how to allow ourselves to do that. So, whatever all that is, I guess
Right.
that's what we're
You
going
go
to do.
get lost in that.
Yeah. um, and remembering how to, yeah, give that ego a promotion, lay it off first from the old job, say thanks, you did a great job, but now we have no need for this position anymore. But I have this other position for you, in aligning with this, so that we all align ourselves this way. And I know we've talked about this over and over before. It's a foundation of things that we talk about in Trinity, but It's almost
Right.
like we had to stop to take a step back and breathe and look at it again and be like, oh, wait, there's still some hidden stuff.
Right. Yes. Yes, there definitely is.
So, because the ego is worried, the ego is still worried. So,
Right.
so let's change all that. So whatever needs to be changed, so we could do that and free ourselves of that. Like you said, the feeling of freedom is incredible to shift
It
that.
really is. Right. Mm.
So,
Oh, let's do that.
whatever. Yeah, let's do all that. All right, you ready?
I am. Yeah, I could have just
I
stayed
could have
there
just
all.
stayed there all. I know. Well, it was funny as I just sort of popped in because some sound from outside startled me, but and I was like, oh, how long were we out there? Because it felt like we were out there for a really long time.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Right, that was really nice.
That was
Yeah.
so nice. That was just so nice. It felt like such a clean slate. I saw, all the, we talk about the nooks and crannies and everything, and I just saw that just smoothed away. It was like it all becomes part of everything, and that everything, the clean slate, start over, new job for the ego, new place, and it just felt so appropriate for where we were. Yes, in this space and time that we've created with the new beginning of the new year and everything, and it's like just felt so free and so fresh and
Yes.
oh
Yep. Like enlightening in the way of lightening our load like by so much,
exactly.
right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And I literally saw, I can't remember the whole thing, but there were several like things that I saw that were very like duh moments like out
Yeah.
there. But then I remember at one point there was part of me that put these big filled up suitcases at my feet. And they were like, so do you want them or not? Do you want to continue carrying these around with you or are you done? And I was like,
Right.
oh, no, Nat, let's get them gone. And they just floated away. They just disintegrated. And I was like, oh, oh, yeah, that.
Right. Yeah. I kept thinking, okay, if I breathe in nothingness and breathe out everythingness, and I did that for a while, and I was like, no, that still feels too separate. And then I was like, okay, breathe in everything, breathe out nothing. And it was like, no, that's still not it. And it was like, breathe in everything, breathe out everything, and everything just, it was like the ultimate equilibrium. It was just so perfect and so smooth and so everything all at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah. And it
Really
is
nice.
time. It is
Yeah,
timely within the confines of time and space
right.
because
Yep,
we've done so much shifting this year, so much. With only 2 weeks left of the physical calendar, year confines of that. But, I know we put a lot of weight on that.
right,
And this has been such a phenomenal shifting experience over the past several, well, I would say this whole year, this whole calendar year. But we're finally getting to this place of really, I mean, all of this stuff is really freeing us up to just really be our like optimal, divine, full saturated note of a self in any
right.
moment. And that can be anything. That was the beauty. That's just the beauty of that. It was so freeing. And like I said, those suitcases disintegrating felt like I just like got rid of like 3,000 pounds I didn't realize I was carrying with me.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
And it was just as collective. So like just for anybody who's watching this or whether or
right,
listening, it's just as collective as it is individual. And actually, the whole act of us doing this share, and we call it a collective energy share every week, is completely exactly what we were talking about last week with the individual wholeness being completely concentric with the divine wholeness and everything in between because everything that's going on in a collective way is going on in an individual way as
right.
well, and vice versa. And it's
Yep,
all related. So it just one thing always affects the other seamlessly. And when we do that without saying, no, that has to be mine or that can't be mine or whatever, it's just like, oh, it just is. And then it just shifts. So
right. Yep,
yeah, so that's for everybody to play with this week. What a
yeah.
great, what a great playground. So thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah C. Avignoni.
signing off with this week's Sunday World. Have a great one.
Thank you.